Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome to New York University, Casa Italiana Zerilli-marimò, and the Department of Italian Studies. On behalf of the Casa and the department, and here is its chair, Eugenio Refini, I welcome you all here for the presentation of Massimo Di Gioacchino book, The Ruin of Souls, A Religious History of Italian Catholic Immigrants in the United States, 1835-1921. It's a great chance not only to welcome back Massimo, that has been on our faculty, in several different embodiments or incarnations, given the topic, but also to welcome back old friends of the Casa, Professor Hasia and Sciorra, and to welcome for the first time to the Casa Stefano Villani. Brief introductions, because there is a lot to say about the book, and I'm very, very anxious to hear what our guests have to say about it. As you know, after COVID, we transition to very short bios because we have very complete bios if you just click on the name of our guests on the website. So, Massimo Di Gioacchino is a historian of the late modern transatlantic world. He currently serves as director of the Research Initiative on Global Italian Religious Network here in the Department of Italian Studies at New York University. He has been here, as I told you, as a Tirosegno visiting professor. This is his latest book, obviously, and Massimo's interests are in Italian religious minorities and migration of Italians to the US, especially vis-a-vis their religious experience once they landed here. He did extensive research both in the anciently called Vatican Secret Archive, that is not as secret anymore, I understand, and in local archives here in the United States. Professor Hasia is Professor Emerita at the Department of History and Sciorra Department of Hebrew and Judaic Studies here at New York University. She's been our guest before. It's a delight to have her back. And she's an expert in the history of migration. And she, I just remind you, one of the books that I think she presented here, Hungering for America, Italian, Irish, and Jewish Foodways in the Age of Migration. And I think that's the one we presented here at the Casa. She's the author of many other books, and she's a tireless, also public intellectual. I just heard one of your public speeches on a podcast, and it was very enlightening, and I liked it a lot. Stefano Villani is professor of early modern European history at the University of Maryland. He's a special in early modern religious history and has worked on the cross-cultural political and religious relations between Britain and Italy. His latest book is Making Italy Anglican, Why the Book of Common Prayer was translated into Italian, and this came out in 2022. And Joseph Sciorra is the director for academic and cultural programs at the John D. Calandra Italian American Institute, Queens College, at CUNY, City University of New York. A dear colleague with whom we have worked on a variety of different enterprises, from book presentations to exhibits and many other things. His specialty is history of folklore and material history. He has edited and published many books as author. He's also responsible for the public programs of the Calandra Institute. And I just want to mention this one, but it's going on right now, right? It's your annual conference.
And I have flyers if people need.
Yes, and this year is dedicated to religious beliefs and the supernatural in Italy and across Italian mobilities, and it's going to start
Friday and Saturday.
Friday and Saturday. So we have flyers if you're interested in the topic. It's a great conference that Joe personally put together with great scholars. So without further ado, I would like to invite Massimo to take the floor and to proceed as you discussed with your colleagues. Thank you all again very much.
I think I will give the floor to Hasia first, but I take this chance to thank all staff of the Casa Italiana, people from the Department of Italian Studies, and also the three discussants who are here on the stage tonight. I just take this chance to say that it's a great honor to have the chance to discuss and get into conversation about this book with them, and so I really look forward to this conversation. Please, Hasia.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here, but thank you so much for inviting me. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, and really, it's a tremendous honor, and I am definitely the outsider here, and I've worked on the history of American Jews and Irish American history, but I did have, yes, the book Hungering for America, which looked at Italians, Irish and Jews, and their food adaptation to America. I've obviously taught much about Italian Americans in my many years of teaching immigration history, so But now that's enough about me, and I want to turn to this really wonderful book. So, and please excuse my looking at my notes, but I just want to make sure I cover everything I wanted to say about it. So, finally, the book provides a really important service to any number of bodies of scholarship. It augments them, and it also just changes the nature of those fields of study. Immigration and history in general and its transnational context, the tidal wave of Italian immigration to the United States, the nature and landscape of American religion, the history of interethnic relationships in the United States, and I'm going to say almost, the formative role played by money in religious history. And I would say parenthetically that as I started reading, I began to underline every time in the book money and finances came up, and it was probably the most written about topic in the book, and I thought that was a kind of breath of fresh air in the scholarship. Okay, but finally, this book forces us to think about religious history not as doctrine or theology or belief or ritual practice, but rather about power and power dynamics. It takes culture, the concept of culture, which in my notes has quotes, because I've come to not know exactly what that means. It's taken culture off the center stage in thinking about Italian religious history in the United States and replaced it with power and politics. So very quickly, let me summarize the scholarship before this book, and I expect this book will just wipe away all of that previous writing and open up a new chapter. In the previous scholarship has said, without any question, that Italian immigrants to the United States, unlike other Catholic immigrants, evinced a very lax attitude towards their Catholicism. They showed up less often. They contributed much less. They expressed disdain for the Catholic Church, marching with their feet, in a way the opposite by just staying home, or marching off to other, particularly Protestant denominations, and that they just they did not provide a core of American Catholicism. They have been described in the literature going back to the 1920s and the Chicago School of Sociology, Robert Park's Old World Traits Transplanted as pagan, as primitives, as pagan, as backward peasants who clung to rituals inappropriate to American standards, and this put them in a direct conflict with the American Catholic Church, made up almost exclusively of Irish hierarchs, who by the 1880s and 1890s, when the vast Italian immigration is taking off, the Irish hierarchs were so committed to making Catholicism a respectable American religion, to defang it in the eyes of America's Catholic foes, who obviously were quite anti-Catholic, and so that the arrival of these Italian primitives set the Irish hierarchs into a kind of tailspin. In most of the literature, the Italian immigrants have been presented as a problem for the American Catholic Church, who saw them as ungovernable, as unwilling to buckle under authority. Okay, how's that? Okay, then that'll keep me from looking at my notes so well, but thank you. Okay, so the general attitude has been that the Italian, in the scholarship, is that the Italian immigrants were primitives, stubbornly committed to rituals and to ways of engaging with religion that were utterly inappropriate to America. In addition, that literature has talked about Italian immigrants to the United States as people unable to work together towards some common goal, that they were concerned only with their families. The political scientist Edward Banfield in 1958 called it amoral familism. All they thought about was their own families, and they couldn't band together for some common purpose. So this was the scholarship as it has stood, and The Ruin of Souls tells a very different history. It's based on an immersion in sources which, as far as I understand, have never been consulted before, or if those sources have been consulted, Professor Gioacchino has consulted them in a very different way. These sources tackle the actual religious lives of the Italian immigrants. They are both Italian sources, Vatican sources, American sources from an incredible number of different communities and cities around the United States. And in this, he has not only consulted new sources, but he has really broken the paradigm as we have had it. So in terms of what the book does, convincingly, and which for the most part has eluded nearly all scholars before him, is making the issue of political power and the financing and the money involved in church life at the center of the analysis. Okay, I'm so sorry here. Okay, now the Ruin of Souls shows us a group of people who everybody else described as primitive, backward, and impervious to American values and American ways of doing. One reads the book and finds that they're incredibly American, in as much as they pick up on the opportunities and options available to them in America in a place where the state does not support religious institutions in any way, shape, or form, given the U.S. Constitution's non-establishment clause in the First Amendment. So that reality that the Italian immigrants living in a string of communities all across the United States, as described in this book, recognized that they could, in fact, impact their own religious lives by asserting their will and circumventing the authority structure, makes them not stubborn primitives from a backward place, but makes them people who recognized what American realities opened doors for them. Okay, so in the words that we see, in the text we see here, in The Ruin of Souls, Professor Gioacchino tells us that, and I'm going to use some of his own words, that Italian immigrants vis-a-vis their religious lives in America showed initiative and independence. Okay, incredibly American concepts of organizing community life. He continues, and I'm going to again quote him, "The lack of assistance and supervision from the Holy See and the bishops gave the immigrants a chance to establish their own initiatives." Again, exactly what the scholarship has said they never did, okay, in their ecclesiastical life, in the founding and management of churches, organization of religious processions, and collection of money. And also, and I think this is crucial, and again quoting from the book, in direct communication, they maintained, quote, direct communication and bargaining. Okay, these Italian immigrants in the United States bargaining with the popes, the Secretary of State, okay, and the Propaganda Fide. So here are people who are banding together, who are, again, in the words of the book, challenging clerical authority challenging clerical authority in many dioceses, giving them the ability, quote, to negotiate their role, okay, in the churches and to establish situations of relative independence. Okay, so the Italian immigrants who emerge in these pages do not resemble whatsoever those who've shown up in the works of scholars who I've taught and whose work I have admired over the years. So I'm going to have to rethink how I teach this history, having read this book. So these are forceful, independent individuals committed to their Catholic spiritual lives, but doing so on their own terms and working together to make those mandates into institutional practices. So I'm going to end by offering some suggestions for future research, in as much as no book can do everything, but I hope that all future scholarship on Italian-American religion, particularly in the immigrant generation, will use the Ruin of Souls as their starting point. I hope this becomes the foundational text. So first, the Ruin of Souls tends to downplay regional and local differences among the millions of Italians who came to the United States. And while the book is replete with references to different communities and enclaves made up of either predominantly people from a particular section of Italy or mixed regions within Italy, it doesn't make region and locale central to its analysis, and it would be interesting to overlay this analysis with a more regional and local engagement with the migration. A next book, okay, not necessarily one that you're going to write, but that I hope somebody else will take certain demographic realities about the Italian immigration and try to factor them in. First, we know that the Italian immigration to the United States, particularly from the South, was heavily male, and that women show up later, and that Italian-American enclaves or Italian immigrant enclaves in America had many years of being essentially bachelor communities. And so I'd be interested to know how that may have impacted some of these religious decisions. In addition, we know that the Italian men, fathers and sons who came to the United States, came with one of their purposes was to earn enough money to send back as remittances home. So how did their moral obligation to send money to their families back home impact their ability to commit to sustaining religious institutions in the United States? In addition, we know that Italians had a fairly high rate of return migration to Italy, some of them going back and then coming again to the United States. So again, how did that play itself out in the religious lives of the people whose religious decisions show up in this book, or would be the basis for a further set of studies? Additionally, we also know that a vast number of the southern of people from particularly the south of Italy who left went to Latin America, to Argentina, and to other places in South America. And so there they are going to places with a very different legal and religious landscape, and where the relationship between the church and the state, which is very different than in the United States. They also didn't have a vast hegemonic Protestant population at their heels, nor an Irish hierarchy. So how did it work out in those other places, and how might it have been different? And it might help actually see how terribly American this story is. Okay, America, that is, United States. Okay, and then finally, I would love to see, again, a scholar pick up on this story about Italian immigrant religious life in the United States and put it in conversation with the religious lives of immigrants from Poland, from Czechoslovakia, from the Czech immigrants, from closer to home, French Canada, for New England, for Mexican immigrants, Germans, so other Catholic immigrants from very different kinds of places. Did they buckle under the Irish hierarchs, or did they engage in fairly similar kinds of acts of autonomy or of autonomous action, independent of what the local hierarchy was saying? So those are studies I'd like to see in the future, but I would hope, and indeed I expect, that none of those studies will be able to be done without taking the Ruin of Souls as a point of departure.
I think it's a good.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Once again, thanks so much to Hasia Daniel for these remarks and also for this latest suggestion. So I'm going to try to briefly answer and get some kind of response to these points before I give the floor to the other two discussants. So the first point seems to me what you called it. My book somehow does not take into deep consideration the regional, local context, which we know, and it's really an essential part of the way immigrants settled and organized their social life in the United States. True, I would why is that? True, the first answer would be my effort was really to give the voice to all the documentation I was able to gather in the archives, and also to have as much as possible a comprehensive general overview of the ecclesiastical history of Italian immigrants based on this documentation. And so my effort was more to bring together the archival resources than to organize them based on the different regional and local context. So this is something as you suggested, should in the future should be taken into deeper consideration, because as I try to, quickly, briefly explain several chapters of the book, the truth is that every church, every community, every city had this regional context. So, for example, if we want to fully understand the settlement and the first dynamics in the 1860s, 1870s, there are some very interesting situations and conflict of power between the confraternities and lay people with priests and bishops. For instance, in Boston, the Church of the Sacred Heart, or Sant'Antonio of Padua, 1860s. So before the beginning of mass migration. So we have to consider that they were not Southern Italians. They were Ligurians. They were from Liguria. They were from northern Tuscany. So, for example, if we want to have a focus on certain periods, certain cases, yes, absolutely. This is something that should be done, and so probably it can be done in the future. Again. I would say I would answer to these remarks like this. Then as you mentioned, again, it might be fruitful to take into account demographics and certain dynamics. One of the most important is the fact that almost 45% of the Italian immigrants used to come back to Italy. Usually they would go back around May, June, and come back to the United States in September, October. How much this impacted the story that I tried to tell in the book? I think very much. So the lack of stability, the idea that the fact that these people did not think to belong to those dioceses, to those places, was one of the factors, for instance, that influenced their reverence, their respect to the authority of the American bishops, because they felt they belonged to the communities in Italy more than the communities in the other states. So there are definitely some social, demographic, some dynamics that should be taken more into account, and this would probably represent another layer of difficulty, I should say, as I hear it, because it would need to give a further depth to the book, which I've not given yet. Again, in trying to consider not only their ecclesiastical life, which is something I tried to do, but also what was really going on in their lives outside churches. I think this is, if I understood well. Then you refer to South America. This is, again, we always think, or we used to think, or the traditional simplistic understanding of migrations is, and Italian migration is that Italian immigrants move from A to B, or A to B and B to A if they return. This is not the case. We know this. Italian moved from A to B, from B to C and D, and these C and Ds are Buenos Aires, Brazil, sometimes Northern Africa, certain point. So the experiences, the situations, the people that I mentioned, that I described in the book, circulated in a wider context. It would be super interesting to try to track them. I would say sometimes I was able to do that, then I did not necessarily bring that material into, put that material into the book. But it would make, also this would be another level of challenge, of course. And because as you perfectly said, Brazil, Argentina, different kind of relationship between church and state, European Catholic countries. And so it would be a comparative history that would risk to be very theoretical, which is, but it should not be theoretical and again sociological, but I think it would be particularly hard but challenging, and so probably should be done to get into wider context. And then last point, you said it would be interesting to try to push this analysis, this examination of this dynamics within the Catholic community in the United States, outside of the Italian neighborhoods, and trying to understand how these certain situations, how certain experiences and situations, if they happen, how they unfolded among Polish and other immigrants, perhaps trying to do a Catholic history, a religious history that is not an ethnic history, because mine, of course, is a religious history, but also very much. And for this would be also crossing, intersecting different archival material. Again, it's would be interesting. Would definitely also be would allow us to have a wider understanding of what was happening, for instance, in New York at the time, where different ethnic communities, also different Catholic communities, were interacting with each other. As you said, not just the Italian and the Irish, but there were also French, German. Many German had immigrated earlier, before. So again, I take these suggestions and I took notes, and I will keep thinking about them. Thank you so much.
So. Thank you so much. So in the summer of 1908, in White Plains, New York, Father Mariano, the pastor of Our Lady of Mount Carmelo, narrowly escaped an assassination attempt. His offense was attempting to suppress the traditional procession of San Rocco in order to divert the festival funds toward the construction of a new church building, a thing that, as the violent overreaction of some of his parishioners make plain, his flock clearly did not accept. This is just one of the many fascinating stories in the book by Massimo. It was not an isolated accident. Across the United States, there are many of these violent threats against priests who were physically beaten by their own parishioners. These episodes of violence are not anecdotes, as they are, as Di Gioacchino shows in this extraordinary book, symptoms of the structural crisis, the chaotic but creative breakdown of canonical authority over Italian Catholic immigrant communities in the United States between the 1850s and the early 1920s. The Ruin of Salt is a fascinating book that has already been said, is a groundbreaking book. It's changing the narrative of the historiography that was based on the idea of a religious Italian culture that was pagan or magical. There is a very interesting debate in the first pages about how we should move away from the traditional historiography that revolve around the researches of Secoli and Tomasi in the 60s and 70s, the idea of a binary interpretation that looks at this history between considering that primitive versus modern is rejected completely in this book. Italian immigrants were neither trying to preserve a backward folk Catholicism, nor they did reject Catholic doctrine, abandon the Pope, convert to Protestantism, as it happened, was the claim that recurred very often in some of the sources. What they did repeatedly and in ways that alarmed both the Holy See and the American episcopate was organize their ecclesiastical life outside or against the norm prescribed by canon law. This is what Di Gioacchino calls ecclesial heteropraxis, a systematic divergence from the juridical canon of the Church that does not constitute theological dissent. They were not heretics. They were, in a precise sense, institutional rebels. The book populates the stage with a complex cast of actors. Some of them have been already mentioned. Roman propaganda fide, the Scalabrinians, the Roman authority, the American bishops, predominantly Irish, that protected the diocesan autonomy from Rome, were remaining deeply suspicious of Italian superstitious practices. There is a very important council at Baltimore in 1884 that declined to develop a coherent plan for Italian immigrants, deflecting responsibility by blaming the bishops of southern Italy for failing to catechize their people before immigration. And the priests themselves were also a deeply heterogeneous group. Some dedicated missionaries, often financially corrupt or fleeing ecclesiastical discipline in Italy. Here one is reminded of the anecdote that Julian Deotti loved to repeat, that whenever Pius XI was informed of a priest in a vocational crisis, he would ask only 5 words. Come si chiama la signora? What is the lady's name? At the center of this stands the laity, anything but homogeneous, divided by region, class, and local affiliation, yet united by remarkable capacity to organize, resist, and when necessary, break away entirely. Weak episcopal oversight and an assertive laity led to what Di Gioacchino presents with great effectiveness as the collapse of the canonical order, the Church's inability to enforce the system of norms it had developed over centuries in Europe. Faced with a new religious environment shaped by Protestant culture and by a radical different relationship between church and civil society, Italian immigrants tried desperately to reproduce the familiar religious structures of their villages. In doing so, they paradoxically built something entirely new. In this brief overview, it's impossible to do justice to the many examples of this creative adaptation to a free market of religion, a market that immigrants enter without fully realizing that in doing so, they were undermining the very idea of Catholicity they wished to preserve, and adopted models heavily in debt to the Protestants. National parishes, organized around ethnic rather than territorial lines, frequently opted in competition with each other and with territorial parishes, lowering fees for baptism marriages to attract parishioners in what was in effect a confessional market. Italian immigrants began to view the church as a voluntary association. As financial supporters, they claim rights to manage property, control budgets, and choose their own priests. They formed boards of trustees that were modeled on American civil law to claim ownership of churches that they help finance, electing members in popular assemblies, and in some cases physically locking out bishops and priests. The Philadelphia case in 1867, when Italian parishioners of St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi, the oldest Italian Catholic parish in the United States, changed the locks, formed a board of trustees by popular vote, and wrote to Propaganda Fide to defend their rights under American law, is emblematic. Pius IX privately called their conduct semi-schismatic, but also instructed the bishop to find an acceptable Italian priest, condemnation and concession in the same breath. In the same pragmatic spirit, Italian immigrants navigated the boundary between church and state in ways unconceivable in Italy. While conservative bishops denounced public schools as seminaries of infidelity, Italian communities often collaborated with state authorities through hybrid arrangements that allowed public funding for secular instruction during the day alongside Catholic religious education after hours. In the vacuum left by this episcopal policy, lay-led schism flourish, and there are many instances that you can read in the book. The procession of San Rocco that nearly cost Father Mariano his life, the episode that I began with, was not a survival of folk religion, but a site of contested authority, organized by lay confraternities without episcopal authorization, often for financial gain, and regularly conducted in defiance of episcopal prohibition. And throughout all of these, a new collective identity was being forged. Many immigrants, this has already been said, were arriving for different places, a little sense of being Italian. It was in this struggle for their own churches and processions, often against Irish bishops, that they increasingly came to define themselves as Italians. The national parish paradoxically produced the very Italian-American identity. It was designed merely to serve. I hope that I have been able to give a sense of the richness of this research, as has already been said. But I would like to close with a few questions that the book raises, a question that can be also interpreted as before as invitation for future work. The first concerned Latin, a theme I came with particular interest, given my own interest, my own work on Protestant and Anglican propaganda directed to Italy. When Di Gioacchino and his sources speak of services in Italian, they clearly meant preaching, catechism, and pastoral instruction. The Mass itself remained in Latin throughout this period. The tension between the universal Latin liturgy and the locally contested vernacular runs beneath the entire story, but is never fully addressed. What did it mean for a community to fight so fiercely over its Italian language priest when the central act of Catholic worship was conducted in a language that almost no one in the pews understood? Second, and closely related, is the question of voices. The book's focus on the juridical and canonical dimension of Catholic life and clearly leaves the interior life of the immigrants in the background. The emotional texture of attending Mass in a church basement where you were not entirely welcome, or of marching in a procession your bishop had explicitly forbidden, the experience of women similarly circumscribed by the canonical framework, which was in itself exclusively male. The voices of ordinary believers reach us virtually only through the distortions of institutional records, complaints, protests, petitions, administrative decisions. The laity act and occasionally riot, but we rarely hear them in their own words. This is unavoidable given the nature of the source, and Gioacchino is honest about this limitation. But it prompts a question: is further research possible in this direction? Would it be possible to find sources that could help us understand the inner logic of lay agency rather than only its institutional effects? And by emphasizing how innovative is this research, through meticulous archival research that has already been mentioned, I move away from the paradigm that I describe. To use a metaphor well known in immigration studies, Di Gioacchino shows how transplanted religion grown in different soil, produce something dramatically different from its place of origin. Different not only in form, but in its very institutional logic. What emerged from this crucible of a contradiction was an ecclesiastical structure, ecclesial structure, very different from the intention of the actors who produce it. And this is important not only from a historical point of view, but also for understanding some of the contemporary developments in this country. Now that the Catholic Church has an American Pope, the question of the peculiar identity of American Catholics becomes incredibly urgent. This led to my third question, after Latin and the recovery of lay voices. How does this specific story help us understand better the development of American Catholicism? We clearly need to use the plural. And what was the specific Italian-American contribution to this process compared to the Irish and Hispanic contributions? Addressing the same question from a different point of view. And with this, I admit, a rather broad question, I truly am thanking Massimo and Casa Italiana for the opportunity to be here and to discuss this remarkable research. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. So appreciate. I am grateful for your remarks, and I'm gonna try to see if I can answer them at least in part. Again, the first question is somehow a provocation. So they built their, they claim their own identity, and again, when I say identity, it's not about very much about, it's about culture, but it's not culture as we may mean it, but it's really about social activism, power, as we said. And so they built, for instance, in the Church of the Sacred Heart in Boston, which was established independently, autonomously by the Società San Marco Society in 1884. They built an old Methodist church. They got inside. They considered it their own church. They started praying, meeting at night without a priest, and then asked for permission to the Bishop of Boston to be recognized. And in this case, as you said, of course, they were not able to recite or to have a regular mass in Latin because they would need a priest, but they would have services, they would have prayers, they would have spiritual meetings, all of this in their own local dialect, and then you, as you said, still, I mean, the whole structure and liturgy of the church was in Latin. Isn't it ironic? I would say yes, it is. I would the underlying impression, thesis that is in the impression I had throughout the research, and the thesis is underlying in the book, is that the Italian immigrants changed as much as possible what they could change. They tried to impact their lives as much as possible, to organize their ecclesiastical life as much as possible, but there were things that could not possibly change, and where they would not engage in a fight. Like, for instance, again, getting into doctrinal disputes, into a theological level that they would not own, and for instance, of course, challenging or disputing the use of Latin language. When Protestant missionaries, pastors, societies, agencies would try to make them do the further step, because they were Protestant, again, missionaries and pastors, communities, where we know now that they were somehow conscious that there was a rebellion, there was a positive chaos within the communities. When they would ask the communities, some of them, to make the further step and step away from the church, they would not do that. So again, the things like then having the whole literature in Latin wouldn't probably not shock them. It was not a cause of concern. Though I should say you have brilliantly worked on especially in the past work that Stefano Albertini mentioned on language, the use of the translation of text, and so there is definitely a linguistic story. Within the story, there is the way language was used within the communities that I do not cover. And so as for the many directions of research that Hasia illustrated before, I take this as another possible way of getting back to the archives, to the material, and try to see. There is something, I know you wrote something about for instance, the translation of the Book of Common Prayer in Philadelphia among the Italian communities. So, there is some work to do on that. I said, as I was looking at this all vast, new in terms of newly used documentation, I tried to stick as much as I told myself, let's stick to a line, and I told myself, let's focus on the really ecclesiastical, political, factual, the life dynamics. Anything else would have made this book that risked and to be very wide, because then there's the whole dimension of the relationship between these practices that we are all mentioning and canon law. So there is the whole level of the rules of the church, the norms. I thought this was already too very wide, very risky. Well, I really felt very humble, very. I tried to be very careful. I hope I was when I got into certain discussions and I examined certain issues. So I tried to skip, not to get into all of this. But again, I think of course, you're bringing up many other ways to get to deepen this history. Interior voices. I think someone told me this at a certain point, and I think you can say that this book somehow gives life to the ordinary people, because you can understand, you can figure out how common people in confraternities, these poor literal immigrants, were trying to build churches and challenge the priests. So it's somehow a history of ordinary people, but interior voices are missing. I should say it's really hard to find these interior voices. Again, Italian immigrants were poor, very, very literate. What they wrote, like the petitions that they sent to Rome, to the Pope, to Propaganda Fide, which I mentioned, they were written by the so-called prominenti, so the merchants, the ones who were leading the confraternities, and so they were the few who could write. And when they wrote, they really wrote to gain something. So these interior voices are somehow missing. I think they are hard to find. If someone can find them, or can find a way to retrace these voices, would be really wonderful. And then the first point you if I understood well, you were asking me how this chapter of American Catholic history, how the Italians contributed to building the whole American Catholic identity. And now here I would really say I'm not probably the best person to answer this, and so I'm not going to answer it, because I do not have a wider, especially after 1921 in the late 20th century, early 21st century. I don't have a solid understanding of the history. So I would give you my feelings, but I prefer not to disclose them. But I just take the chance to go back to something you said that for me was really very important. Was some of the realization of some of the things that the documents told me that I wasn't really expecting. That's the same actions can have different meaning. The same social actions can have, generally speaking, and did have different meanings, different strategies, different purposes, and different power dynamics. And this was really something I discovered I realized looking at the sources, and it's the case of the religious processions. There is in the book a very short chapter. I wish I made it longer, I should say. But I didn't want to go back to, I did a little bit of this, but I didn't want to retrace the whole way religious celebrations were performed, because it's not a book about devotion, about ritual performance. So I didn't want to, again, to get away from the line of the book. But there is a chapter about religious processions, which is chapter 10, towards the end, which is, just to, here it is, chapter 10, a short chapter, I think 10, 12 pages, where I try to document, to examine how religious processions were organized, again, in a very ecclesiastical, political way, so not looking at the devotion. And what was interesting, that these processions raised fierce condemnation by Italian priests, American bishops, by several people within the church, and they seem to constitute something, they were considered deeply illicit, deeply irregular. And truth is, they were really the same kind of religious processions that were held in Italy at the time, which is what prompted historians, sociologists at the time to say they are bearing the same kind of religiosity. Look at the processions in East Harlem. They are really the same they are holding in Basilicata, in Puglia. So if the religious expression is the same, they are bringing to the new world the old world, the devotion. And truth is, they were really the same. The confraternities at the beginning with the stendardo, the saint, they would just add the dollars as it's known on the statue, but everything looked the same. Truth is, they worked in totally different ways. In Italy, they were part of centuries-old traditions. The priests would manage them. The whole village would take part. They were the rule. They were the norm. They were the standard. They were the canon. In the United States, they disrupted the whole order, but they were the same. So something that I really I discovered something I appreciated as I was doing the research. It's the fact that the same actions, the same religious practices might have totally different opposite meaning, have different strategies, have different results based on where they are performed. Because again, and this is something that you realize if you don't look at the devotional aspect, which is totally important as everything I've been covering. But if you just look at the performance of the religious life of the immigrants, you don't get that. If you look at the archives and you look at the political dynamics, you see that those processions, again, were used, for instance, to claim certain churches as Italian, and they would have different meanings. And we know, for example, what some of, and here I would stop, just to give you, to those who have not read the book yet or who will not read it, for instance, sometimes the American bishops would assign the churches to a mixed community with Italians. In Philadelphia, there was a community in Augustinian parish. I'm now forgetting about the name, but a mixed, a parish given to a mixed community, a territorial community. In the case of this case of the parish in Philadelphia in 1910, it was given to the Italians and African Americans. But the day of the inauguration, before the bishop would start an official celebration, Italians would move from the neighborhood, organize a whole parade, the confraternities would enter the church, and they would claim this is Italian. Because they used the religious procession to color the parish as Italian, to something that in Italy would just not have applied because they were not African Americans. So I appreciate you, Stefano, bringing up this issue. It's something that I've really been looking into and have made me thinking a lot throughout the research.
As the final speaker, I'm going to be basically covering a lot of the topics that have already been discussed. So, but hopefully I'll be giving it a different spin. And as a folklorist, I'm also going to be introducing some aspects of culture, but as I understand it, within the dynamics of the power structure that Massimo addresses so well in the book.
His mic is not running.
You want to change the microphone maybe? That is very soft.
How about now? Better?
Thank you.
In my neighborhood, Ridgewood, Queens, there is a Protestant church which each week posts a different line or an allusion from New Testament scripture on its outdoor illuminated sign in anticipation of the week's sermon. These snippets are often catchy, alluring, and poignant. Of the many that have caught my eye over years, there is one that I think is particularly relevant to today's discussion, an allusion to the temptation of Jesus, which simply read, "Lost in the wilderness of religion." This line recalls the varied religious encounters and experiences of the thousands upon thousands, the millions of Italian immigrants in the religious pluralism that was and still is the United States. Such encounters are at the heart of Massimo's critically important book, The Ruin of Souls. It is a rich and brilliant work that expands, and I've printed this at 18 font because my eyes are really going for reading, so you'll have to bear with me as I turn the page very quickly. Our understanding of Catholic lives during the period of mass migration and even before. It has certainly deepened my appreciation to the dilemmas facing the American Catholic clergy working on the ground in the time period. Massimo's deep dive into the archives on both sides of the Atlantic, from the Vatican to various local U.S. dioceses, as well as addressing Italian and American scholarship on Italian migration and religious studies, offers a new transnational interpretation of what historically was called the Italian problem, which referred to the horrid social conditions Italian migrants found themselves, as well as their form and style of Catholic practice and their relationship to the American Catholic Church. This moral panic from the Church's perspective included the immigrants' vulnerability to Protestant proselytizing. Massimo's refocused discussion centers on what he calls the Italian religious question, the ecclesiastic practices of Italian Catholic immigrants. What is particularly noteworthy about this study is the shifting of the so-called problem away from the historically perceived negative attributes of the immigrants to include the clergy in the religious, cultural, and political dynamics that resulted in the ways in which power struggles emerged, were perceived, and were negotiated or not in the time period in question. This more integrated understanding of the then existing conditions is based on Massimo's mining to a large degree of the released Vatican archival resources. I'm interested in understanding, Massimo, what you were looking for, and you addressed it just now, but what you were looking for when you first approached this massive collection of documents. Did you have a set of questions in mind as you set off, or did the argument reveal itself as you shifted through the files? And I assume both. So please help us understand this interrelated process of research and analysis. The resulting dissonance and disconnect has long been a source of curiosity for me as an ethnographer of contemporary Italian-American Catholicism here in New York City and surroundings. This legacy of contention dating back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries pops up in conversations and oral histories I've recorded with people regarding their respective confraternities and their saint statue and procession. The issue of control of sacred imagery and ultimately of money is a through line to the 21st century. I remember talking with an elderly woman on Staten Island in the mid-1980s who was telling me about an incident that took place 30 years prior regarding her lay voluntary association, which had come to retrieve its statue of the Our Lady of Mount Carmel it had left in the local church for the duration of the feast. And the priest subsequently barred the confraternity members from taking it back. The woman summed up her story with a note of bitterness and disgust by simply stating, "The priest stole our statue." A history of emotions concerning Italian-American Catholicism has yet to be written. What we do know is that this type of conflict contributed in varying degrees to a vibrant vernacular culture of religious artistry and sacred performance that has left a lasting mark on people's lives, memories, and a sense of place. Massimo names this relationship between the clergy and laity as ecclesiastic heteropraxis, a lovely phrase, I think. Which involved a deviance from control, but not a challenge to theological principles. This operated on both levels, that is, both for the clergy and for the laity, inside and outside the church, something I would like to explore more from different perspectives. Let me first approach this idea from Massimo's treatment of the concept of the right of patronage, something I was totally unfamiliar with, a practice rooted in Italy in which immigrant laity who helped establish churches, fund its construction, and at times were the actual property owners, maintained that they had authority to manage the collected money and to even install priests of their choosing. And I mean, as has already been quoted, some of the examples there are really quite moving. As Massimo informs us, they even entered into direct communication and bargaining with the Pope. It is these kinds of details that makes the book so illuminating and, dare I say, a great read. It is in a uniquely American fashion, Italian immigrants would at times bring their challenges to the American court system. Massimo's chapter on this topic has helped me better understand the various accounts I've read and heard from Italian-American Catholics over the years. Those leading the charge in asserting this right of patronage, according to Massimo, were the prominenti, that is, the small group of economic, political, and cultural elite immigrants who were generally concerned with their own welfare and public image rather than the public good. It was they, according to Massimo, who established the confraternities, which is important to note also functioned as mutual aid societies, offering sickness and death benefits to its members, and fostered a deep sense of ethnic identity, often with their hometown of origin. Now, I've never understood these lay voluntary associations to be associated with the elite of the prominenti, and I'm thinking the likes of Carlo Barsotti, a truly exploitative banker, landlord, and newspaper owner who mustered his socio-political clout and connections to install a series of monuments in the city, including that at Columbus Circle. Massimo cites Father Gioacchino Gambera, who levels the now classic clerical charge against co-fraternity members in New Orleans as being, quote, astute scoundrels capable of any dishonest exploitation. And I've read this over the years in various literature, and even heard it from various priests, more in a late 20th century setting. It's in moments like this in the book where the archive's resounding silence of those who did not leave records is most vivid, and this is in keeping with your comment. So I'm wondering, Massimo, if you could on one hand elaborate on these Italian Catholics who were making such demands. At one point you cite the incident in which 10,000 Italians marched in Philadelphia to assert their control of a newly found church. Were they all prominenti? I'm curious if we can tease out the strata of whom we consider prominenti in this case, especially vis-a-vis the church dealings. And then on the other hand, if you could discuss a little bit, as you've already done now, the unrecorded voices missing from the record in such accounts. Regarding religious spaces, Massimo offers a wonderfully detailed chapter parsing the differences between missions, chapels, and parishes under the jurisdiction of the church. While reading this section, I couldn't help but think of the numerous vernacular sacred spaces created by the immigrant laity, be it the multitude of impermanent Baroque-style chapels erected annually for the saints' feast days sponsored by the confraternities, The storefront chapels, such as that dedicated to the Black Madonna of Tindiri on East 13th Street, established in 1913, or the various freestanding structures like that of the Lisanti family chapel, commissioned in 1905 by the baker Francesco Lisanti in Whitestone, Bronx, who, according to family history, Father Joseph absconded with congregants' collected donations and resulted then in the baker commissioning this church. The wood chapel dedicated to St. Fibronia in Hoboken, New Jersey, built by Sicilian immigrants from Patti. The so-called Free Church of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, built in 1925 in Corona, Queens, because they, quote, no longer felt welcomed, end of quote, in their local parish. And finally, the Our Lady of Mount Carmel Grotto in Rosebank, Staten Island, that was begun in 1937. These documented non-ecclesial authorized structures were the result of what Father Dominic Marzetti of Hoboken referred to in 1998 as, quote, the contagious fever of building private chapels, end of quote, among Italian immigrants. It is just these irregular ecclesial practices, as Massimo terms them, that emerged out of and contributed to the friction between the church and the laity, and was part and parcel of Italian immigrants' artistic creativity and religious ingenuity. What we might say was the art of arrangiarsi, that tapped ethnically infused aesthetic and religious choices, knowledge, and skills to give expression to shared values and spirituality. You'll excuse the litany of specific sites, but I believe these physical manifestations of Italian religious creativity help illustrate the magnitude of the divide that Massimo investigates so well and with such rigor. As way of conclusion, I'd like to address Massimo's conclusion, in which he raises a current trend in religious studies, that is the scholarly development of what's called lived religion, a shift from the top-down approach to religion, which historically included studies of official exegesis of texts and authoritative understanding of practice, to look instead how religion is interpreted, understood, and practiced by people in their everyday lives. This ethnographic methodology of the study of religion was also an attempt to move away from older approaches organized around the interrelated yet often contradictory categories of folk and official religions, with the former seen as a corrupted and often stigmatized version of the latter. Massimo's astute elaboration on ecclesial heteropraxis demonstrates that the deviance did not occur solely among the immigrant laity, but also at various strata of the American church itself. I'm thinking of American bishops' opposition to the Pope's directives around the religious care of Italian immigrants and their resentment of Rome's interference in the then American church. In addition, the various rogue priests constitute a category of poorly regulated clergy who are undeniably social actors in the overlapping realm of American Catholicism and Italian migrants. It is these two realities, among others, that recalls the work of folklorist and religious studies scholar Leonard Primiano, who Massimo cites in his concluding chapter. Primiano coined and developed the idea of vernacular religion, closely aligned with that of lived religion. Perhaps one of the most provocative ideas in Primiano's conceptualization is the need to examine the vernacularity of institutional religion's representatives. He wrote, quote, "No one, no special religious elite or member of an institutional hierarchy lives an officially religious life in a pure, unadulterated form," end of quote. It seems that some of the circumstances you, Massimo, bring to the forefront and develop is a testament to Primiano's idea that religious officialdom operates in its own vernacular fashion. I can imagine you may not necessarily agree with such a premise, but I raise it because I would love to hear your thoughts on such a suggestion. And with that, I conclude my comments.
Thanks, Joseph. I'm going to try to answer and respond to your remarks briefly as much as possible, so we can perhaps leave some time for to the audience to make questions, but also just to share remarks. And so to do that, I'm gonna answer, bring up again, answer quickly the two of your points, and then to go back to this very last one. So it seems to me that you when you were asking when 10,000 people marched in Philadelphia to claim the church, which is the case, the situation I was bringing up, mentioning before, where all the prominenti, who were they, and so this question really echoed to me the questions that and the points that Hasia was making at the beginning, the need to go deeper into the demographics to understand really who they were. I should say I really understand if I look at my book from this perspective, that my book refers mostly to communities, priests, sometimes prominenti, and that's it. I mean, there is no differentiation. No, I'm not able, because I was really not able, and so and at a certain point, as all work of the research, you have to stop, and so I didn't go into it. But I was not able. I did not fully clarify or get a more solid knowledge or who were the members of these confraternities, mutualist societies, who were these people really. My understanding of who were they has been the understanding of the previous literature. On this, I should really be frankly honest. And so, as you were suggesting, as I was asking me to go to before, we would be interesting to try to understand more. We have some names. We have some names for St. Anthony of Padua. So when there is a petition sent to the Pope from the parishioners of St. Anthony of Padua in it should be 1868, but I should double check. We have the most prominent member of the prominenti. So there is someone who signs, and then there is a list of parishioners who sign this petition. So there are some ways we can get a sense who they were. Not for all churches, but this is definitely interesting direction to take. You brought up, as Stefano did, the question of the internal voices. Here I would just acknowledge and take note of that. It's apparently it is something that you also would be interested to, as I guess many people who will read the book. And as I said, it's problematic, it's lacking, but it would have to be done. Will have to be done by someone in the future. And so I go back to the point, the categories. You said the conclusion. I should say the conclusions of the book. That section was really the most problematic, difficult for me to write. When I was really closing the book, a book that should have been closed years before, but that was really the chapter. I was really, I knew I had to. I wanted to close better, more that framing, that conceptualization was trying to make. At the same time, I didn't want to build macro categories, add other terms. What I tried to escape, what I personally also do not like, because the way I work is to just, again, create names, create categories. I love as much as possible the detail, the facts, the dynamics. And so I would have lied, I would have betrayed my book, my research, if I would have gone forward, but I felt that I had to try to figure out what came out. And so there is a part in the conclusions are really 5-6 pages, where I bring up few terms, and so I basically asked myself, what was all of this? What did the story that I told, is all of this popular religion? Is all of this lived religion? Is of this vernacular religion? Is all of this ordinary religion? And my thesis, the point, the argument I make is that it's something even different, because this is not just popular religion, because popular religion for many reasons is discarded today as a term for good reasons, because it's not just popular. As Joseph said, there were even bishops, priests who were practicing canon laws differently. So it's not just something that happened at the bottom within the communities. It's a whole restructuring of ecclesiastical life. It's not popular. It's not ordinary religion, because ordinary religion is the daily, ordinary, common lives of people. This is all extraordinary. Live religion, but live religion is very much also about performance, the way you feel, the way you experience religion. And my book is not about it's not about how you feel, how you experience it. And it's not even vernacular. This would be probably, I think it's a category term that you cherish, and I also do. But I should honestly say that even that term did not, at least to me, but perhaps I should go back into it and read more, and certainly discuss more with other colleagues. But it also did not bring back to me the dynamics I encounter in the book. That is, in a vernacular religion is religion as it is, as it unfolds. Here, the jurisdictional, juridical, the set of norms, of laws and canons are really part of the story. The fact that Italian immigrants did not necessarily follow the rules, it did not mean that rules did not apply. Many social behaviors, many actions could be explained only because of the relations to the rules. And here I would make a very low-key, banal example, but just to make sure everybody understand the point I'm making. A teenager, a kid, does not, when he or she, when a teenager does not follow his or her parents' rules, it's not because those rules do not apply. It's because those rules are there that the teenager makes certain behaviors. If the parent says, do not go to the disco tonight or come back early, the teenager might want to come back late because there is the rule. And it's something he would not do if there was not the rule. So my book is really trying to also take into account the theoretical, juridical level that was important to these people. And so, again, just to say that I try to figure out how to call this, not because I wanted to just give it a name, but because I wanted to make sense of much work I did. And I think it was honest, not to create macro categories, but to give a sense to the reader of the way I perceived the work I did. And so I hope this. I thank you for bringing this question up. I'm sure you and other people might have even something more to say and to add. Thanks, Joseph.
Hello. I'm mindful of time, but I wondered if, for those of us who have not had the opportunity to read the book, whether you could read a short excerpt.
Why did you choose it? We're going to listen to another question. But we choose a passage.
Yeah, okay.
Was the question here?
I was curious about the title of the book. We've been talking about Italian immigrants, people, and yet the word soul appears, and there's the word ruin. I was wondering what expands to what is the ruin, and how does it show itself?
I have two questions. The first one is about the chronology. 1921 is pretty clear. Quota Act. Why 1853 is that? Even before the Italian unification? And the second question is about the Scalabrinians and other missionary orders that were briefly brought up. were they perceived as alternative leaders to the Prominenti? What was the relationship between the pre-existing mutual aid societies and confraternities and the Italian priests who arrived as missionaries, not as migrants who became priests or as priests who fled the church?
Massimo, we'll buy time while you pick your passage. I have a question regarding that. Everything was fascinating, and thank you to all of you for bringing up such poignant issues within the research of Massimo. The issue of the distinction between the clergy and the laity, and it seems to be a crucial issue. And I was thinking about the confraternities and the power that they had, and that they negotiated this power constantly with the clerical class. And paradoxically, in Italy, they had historically cut out for themselves spaces of power within the church. For example, anything having to do with processions, sacred images, and very often even relics was regulated by the confraternities that were lay associations recognized by the church but very autonomous. That's the model of the Bourbon Kingdom of Spain. And if you go to Spain still now, and you're there for Semana Santa, you will see that the real power regarding whether the processions come out of the church or not, and that's a big decision, because if it rains, they need to decide whether they want to protect the statues, run the risk that everything goes to rotten. It's the confraternities, it's the brotherhood. The priests have nothing to say. They step back and they let these people do whatever they're doing. And of course, the model of these processions and of these brotherhoods and sisterhoods was the Spanish model, because all of these processions came from southern Italy, and that's where the origin is. So it's paradoxical, I think, that you had these sort of parallel secular power within the church in Italy, and when they come here, there isn't the same structure. It's not something that was present in the Irish church that was heavily clerical. So there is this paradox that Italy was less clerical as a structure because they had negotiated with secular authorities, the kings of the two Sicilies and their baron and nobility, these spaces of autonomy. And the other thing regarding the Prominenti, I love that you brought up Carlo Barsotti, and always thought, I know you love him too, I don't, but no, it's very important because his role is fundamental in shaping the Italian image of New York that we have today. Joe was mentioning the 5 statues, the Barsotti 5. And when I think about these statues, and we talk about them in the series on which we work together, Nuova York Hidden in Plain Sight, I think about the writing on the Foro Italico in Rome, dictated by Mussolini, Italy as a people of saints, explorers, heroes, and warriors. There is not one of these statues that is a saint. Poets, yes, you have Dante and you have Verdi. Navigators, explorers, you have Verrazzano and you have Columbus, but no saints. So my hypothesis goes also in the direction of who were these Prominenti and whether they were different from the other Prominenti. The question is definitely, as you had in Italy, the high bourgeoisie, the higher classes, had a very, very heavy influence of the Freemasons that were very anti-clerical, very anti-Catholic, that really would not mingle with anything that had to do with processions, statues, and saints. So I don't know, was Barsotti possibly a Freemason, as many other people that belong to the same social class? And whether the class of the Prominenti within the Catholic communities was a parallel and separate class, like you had in Italy. So maybe the most prominent members of a brotherhood was the local baker. And maybe he knew how to read and write, and therefore he was considered within that circle a Prominente, but not by the likes of Barsotti or the bankers or the publishers. Just an idea.
I'm sure there was prevalent discrimination in the established Irish parishes against the new immigrant Italians, but I was wondering if you found much de jure discrimination, whether the pastor banned or wouldn't allow Italian immigrants into their parish.
Okay, thank you for these questions, and I will read an excerpt at the end. So about the title, someone was asking about the title. So the ruin of souls is the expression Pope Leo XIII used in the encyclical Quam Eurum Nosa, released on December 10, 1888. And it is the expression, the encyclical discussed the condition, the state of Italian immigrants in the Americas, not just North America, but also the South, and indeed try to not only to call and to call all people within the Catholic Church to put a remedy to the state of Italian immigrants, but also describe the actions taken by the Holy See to provide priests for the Italians, to give them parochial schools. So the encyclical really revolves around the Italian problem, really the subject of the book. And when Pope Leo XIII referred to the state of abandonment and neglect of the Italian immigrants and the risk for them to lose their belonging to the church and thus their path to salvation, he used the expression the ruin of souls. Italians were ruining their souls. The Italians were risking to ruin their souls because they were not, again, attending churches, following the directives of priests, and so on. So really this expression, I think it works well. It worked well for me, but it seems it's working well with the readers because it really immediately goes to the matter discussed in the book. So this is the reference. 1853 is the founding of the first Italian Catholic Church in the United States, St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi in Philadelphia. As all Italian churches in the pre-mass migration era, they were not necessarily fully Italian. There were some Irish, sometimes there were some French. So as St. Anthony of Padua. So because the issuing of national parishes by Propaganda Fide is of 1887. So before 1887, canonically there are not national parishes. So when you say St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi was Italian in 1853, it was not official Italian. It meant there was an Italian priest, there was a large congregation, it meant different things. But this is why 1853, the first church, and then as you said, 1921 is the end of the immigration flow. Truth is, there is the Second Quota Act in 1924. The Scalabrinians, someone was asking about that. Oh yeah, Scalabrinians. The poor Scalabrinians, I should say, they were in the middle of this. They tried to do as much as they could, and they faced this and so much more. And Scalabrini, in 1905, before dying, he really shared to the Holy See his sorrow. His frustration, his sorrow, because he had spent all his life trying to do something, and truth is, it was so difficult to provide a solution to all these problems. So Scalabrinians are in the middle of this. Scalabrini tried to send the best, to send or to receive the best missionaries he could to erect healthy, pious communities, churches. But again, the whole situation was such a chaos. Just to be brief and simple, that he was not able really was not on the one hand to do much, but what he did was certainly so important. What? Yes, no, it was so important, but compared to the vastity, the scale of the issue, he was meant to be the solution to the problem, but he could not possibly be. So there's so much material on the Scalabrinians here. I should say the Scalabrinian institution, the Center for Migration Studies, Mary Brown, and the General Scalabrinian Archives in Rome. They knew I was doing research on this, and I brought up scandals, problems. They were extremely cooperative, supportive. I'm so grateful to Giovanni Terragni, Mary Brown, because they did as an archivist a brilliant work. I should say, professionally, they were really. I'm so grateful to them for their help. And I'm gonna try to read. I'm gonna read the excerpt. Yes, appreciate it. Thank you. So this is chapter 5. Chapter 5, titled "Priests, Ministers, and Missionaries." Part 1, because then there is also part 2. I had so much material about Italian priests that I had to do 2 chapters, part 1 and 2, because otherwise it would have been a 60-page chapter compared to others that were smaller. And in chapter 5 and 6, I tried to document and then to describe as much as possible who were these priests who arrived in New York, in Boston, Philadelphia, who were they, why they did come to the United States, why they came to the United States, why they, what they did once here, how they tried to assist the Italians, how they dealt with the American bishops, with the Holy See. I tried really to get into as much as possible. And what is clear, but it's clear because we comes from the correspondence from the letters, is that the vast majority of them were really what Scalabrini calls the refuse of Italian dioceses. So the worst the church could provide. Then you guess why the Italians did what they did. This is clear, and we knew this. We knew that somehow, for a large part or for a certain part, there were some poor priests who were ministering Italian churches. Not all Italian churches. There are several examples of really pious people, especially among Scalabrinians. But in the whole, if you take the whole, if you have a general review on the quality of the priests, we knew from sources already available that the description of the priest was a very poor one. And then when I was by doing research at the archives of the Archdiocese of New York, some collections were available before, but were not really accessible as much as they became later, were not used by historians as much as some others did, and as I used later. So at a certain point, I'm doing research in those archives, and I found this letter by Archbishop of New York, Michael Corrigan, to Giovanni Simeoni, the prefect of Propaganda Fide. So the head of the Archdiocese of New York to the head of the Roman Congregation of the Holy See, who was supervising the whole United States, because until 1908, the United States was considered to be a mission territory, and so was supervised by Propaganda Fide, not by the consistorial congregation. And so this is the document by the chief of the Archdiocese to the chief in Rome, just to explain it. And in this letter, he not only described the Italian priests that were in the Archdiocese of New York in 1884, but he made a full list of all the 12 priests. Think about 12 priests for, at that point, 60, 70,000 Italian immigrants. Not easy to assist all of them. Anyway, he made a list. This was really the document I was trying to find. A list with the names. He omits the last names for privacy. And he makes a list of the priests, 12 priests, and all the accusations. So he did, the Archbishop of New York really did the work for me, as the AI would do today. You ask, can you make a list of all the priests that were in 1984 and all their accusations, and you get it immediately. And so here I report the content of this letter. In one of the initial version, I really reported the letter. I like very much to report the documents. I know some scholars do not like you should explain the document. I prefer just, if the document can speak for itself, to report, to give anyway. So, but eventually I just, there is not the whole document, the whole letter, but I refer to it. So. Was the original in Italian? It was Let me see. I think it was in Italian. I should double check, but I think it was in Italian. The American bishops knew Italian very well, most of them, the vast majority, and so they would speak to the Holy See or to who were in Rome, who would not necessarily know English, because English was not as important as it is today, especially in Rome. But I think it was in Italian. But I should double check. But again, good question. So here, and here I write page 84, 85. The range and gravity of the accusations against Italian priests are clear in a dossier sent by Michael Corrigan to the prefect of Propaganda Fide, Giovanni Simeoni, on August 4, 1884. In the document, the Archbishop included a complete list of Italian priests active in his diocese and accompanied it with some notes on their profile and activities. He noted how Father Pietro of the Diocese of Tricarico, Sicily, had left, quote, to enjoy, as some believed, the company of a girl. Father Costanzo of the Archdiocese of Gaeta, quote, took a pregnant woman with whom he maintained an iniquitous tryst, I don't know what's tryst, there with him, end quote. And Domenico Vento, also from Gaeta, quote, brought to America the woman with whom he held sacrilegious dealings here, end quote. The accusations were not limited to concubinage, but included those of denying, quote, fundamental points of faith, end quote, or being the object of, quote, very grave accusations in matters of honesty, end quote, such as for Father Guglielmo of Tricarico, Father Rocco of the Diocese of Messina was accused of leading a, quote, very bad life with regards to morals and being a blasphemer and card player, end quote. Some, like Father Vincenzo, this is the Archbishop describing them. Some, like Father Vincenzo of the Diocese of Cerreto, had been subjected to suspension multiple times. Father Andrea from Genoa was known for, quote, drunkenness and dishonesty, end quote. And even after a few attempts at correction, he, quote, went back to being the way he was before, so that we came to believe that he was incorrigible, end quote. Finally, Corrigan importantly noted at the end of the letter, quote, all the above, except the last, had good and proper letters of recommendation. From their own bishops.
Any other question?
I can speak on
No, we're recording.
Yeah. Yours, this works. This one. Oh.
Okay, so have you thought about writing the book in Italian? Because I like reading the books in the original languages. And I feel like, for example, you being Italian, it will bring more kind of like authenticity. And also, for example, if you had a chance to actually also publish the book in Italy, because, for example, personally, I never had any experience with Italian Americans, except when I came here. So, I don't know, maybe if you also publish it in Italy, it would have been maybe kind of like a mind-changing experience. Because, you know, in school, even in history classes, we never touched that argument, like that topic. So I was interested in maybe like you were open to write it in Italian. That was my question.
I think so, yeah. So, I first of all, I really wanted the book to be published in English. I thought from the beginning that it would have more readers in America. I thought that many Italian colleagues, scholars, would have been able to read it in English. And so it made more sense to publish it again in English. Truth is that I've been thinking of making an Italian version. which I certainly will not do this year or next year, but it might be. It's also, we know today it's easier to make, would be so much easier for me to make an Italian version, being an Italian native speaker. It is true that I had to. I translated many documents which were in Italian. I should say so. All the Roman documentation, the letters and dossiers in the archives of Vatican Apostolic Archives, Propaganda Fide, most of them were in Italian. And we know when you translate, you always lose something. So. Again, but I'm presenting it in Italy. We have a somehow big presentation we organized at La Sapienza on May 5. So I look forward to speaking with Italian colleagues who will certainly have different perspectives than those, for instance, of Hasia, Joseph, and in part also Stefano, who has been working in the US for many years. But so I'm looking forward to seeing what is the feedback, the reception from historians of Christianity, of religious history, who are within the Italian academia and not the American one. And I will tell you what the reception I will get. Thank you.
So there are copies of the book here for those of you interested, and Massimo will sign them for you. Yeah. And I just want to say that it's, I told you that Massimo is affiliated with our department, so he's currently working as part of the Global Italian Religious Networks, and they have a very interesting project that they're working on right now. And there is Professor Maria Chiara Giorda back there. She's also part of the project. That is the reconstruction, I want to say it correctly without using words that are not the right ones. It's the, here. The reconstruction, Italian religious life in New York City, a digital reconstruction. So it's a very, very ambitious project that involves a lot of historical research, but also a digital reconstruction of places of worship, looking at the different strata that every ethnic group, religious minority brought to these churches. So when the project is completed, we will have beautiful digital 3D reconstructions of these sacred spaces. Some of them don't even exist anymore, and some of them are still standing but changed. And we will see what were the characteristics that were added or brought in by the Italian community. So what made these churches Italian in time, or what made these churches not Italian when the Italians moved out or when the Italians moved in. So it's a project that is very hands-on. It's very on the material history of these places and on how people change places of religion, places of cult in different ways. So Massimo is going to be here back again when the project is completed to present this project along with Professor Giorda. So come back for that. Thank you all again very much, and thank you to this wonderful panel.
Yes. Thanks, Stefano, for again once more. Thanks, Casa Italiana department. Thanks, Stefano. I'm sure because he brought this project, the information about this project. I want to say that we will be organizing a final conference of the project in the Auditorium of Casa Italiana, probably spring 2028, that we will be holding free guided tours in the neighborhoods of New York City, looking at all these churches that some of them were in Philadelphia or Boston, but the St. Anthony of Padua, Most Precious Blood, Our Lady of Pompeii, Transfiguration Church. There will be guided tours with me, with other colleagues. We will bring people, the public, into the churches, show you the wonderful heritage and material richness that there are. So please, I suggest that you sign to the newsletter of the Research Initiative on Global Italian Religious Networks to know when we have these guided tours, when we have the final conference. We will hold workshops, seminars. We are also gathering material, private material from Italians, Italian immigrants, Italian Americans, first, second, third generation. If you have any kind of even family records, baptisms, marriages, anything that could help us. Some materials will not be interesting, of course, on an historical level, but we have a call for contributions, which you find on the website of the research initiative, and so we are asking the citizens of New York City to please share with us their private documentations, which we will deal with the extreme, let's say, care. So don't worry about that. But so we are trying to create a momentum for this call for contributions. And so I thank Stefano for this. And I should be honest and acknowledge that the book is available in open access online. So you don't have to buy the book. I'm going to be honest. So the book is available online, but of course, if you like have a physical copy of the book, we agreed with the publisher that the cost of the printed copy is $34, and tonight is $20, so at the discounted price. So if you really love having the physical copy, it is here. It is upstairs. I think it is upstairs in the lobby. But if you just want to give a quick look into the book, you can find it on the website of the publisher of Bridwell Press of Dallas, Texas. So thanks. Thank you. Thanks again.